Hello, all, and welcome to this Thursday night beer review. Um, yeah, I'm sure by now you've enjoyed those two rather out of the ordinary reviews I uploaded. Well, we're back to Earth, folks. There's a couple of things I have yet to upload there in the docket, but they're just the usuals, you know. But just because they're the usual sort of things I do, easily accessible beer, doesn't mean that I am not going to put 100% of my heart and soul into the effort. So, what are we reviewing today? Well, we're reviewing a Japanese beer. So, yeah. Um, it's kind of funny. I did live in Japan for a while, but I never actually reviewed beers. I reviewed sakes. And I didn't do it for YouTube. Even though, yeah, YouTube was around in 2008, 2009, but it wasn't a very huge thing that it is now. So I basically wrote blog post reviews of sakes. That stopped after I moved back to Hawaii because sake is fairly expensive outside of Japan. Anyways, what is it that we're reviewing today? We are reviewing a beer from Orion, and that's how they pronounce it in Japan. Um, in the West we call it Orion, and I'm pretty sure most people who buy this in the West call it Orion, but in Japan it's called Orion. It is, forget which of the major brewers owns it. I think it's Asahi. Correct me if I'm wrong. But originally it was an independent brewery in Okinawa, basically Okinawa's beer. And this is 75 Pilsner. And let's go just read the back here. 75 reflects the unique combination of the devotion to beverage quality and craftsmanship of Japanese beverage masters and the sun-ripened natural ingredients of the southern island of Okinawa. Okay, I probably would have tightened that up a little bit, but you know, you get what you get. This is 5.0 ABV, and is classified as a German Pilsner on Beer Advocate. But I didn't. Well, let's just get to this, shall we? And we'll discuss that as we go along. Oh, and by the way, expiration date is 2024-07, so July 2024. So this is fairly fresh. Pouring it into the Pilsner glass. Of course, lots of bubbles stuck to the side because this glass is very, very difficult for me to clean. Check out the size of my hand compared to the size of the glass. And you'll notice that it's fairly dark colored for a Pilsner. This is, I'm not sure what the malt or hopping bill is, but there is a frothy white head. Smells floral and slightly spicy, noble hops. Crackery malts, whetstone. Actually, with the sweetness, I would say the malting is a bit more towards the bready end. You can kind of see the coloration is really, really dark yellow, almost shading into orange. And the carbonation is also pretty minimal here. I usually expect like German style Pilsners to be very, have a lot of visible carbonation. So already with the nose, I'm detecting a lot more, ambient sweetness from the malts than I would expect for a German Pilsner. And onto the palate now. Get some bitterness up front, and the top note up front is also very strongly of those noble hops. Actually has a pretty decent perceptive bite on the palate. Not so much visible, but it does bite when you take a sip of it. There is a stronger bitterness that kind of comes out in the mids, while at the same time, the sweetness of the malts kind of comes out in the mids. And you're left with some bitterness in the finish. Actually, a fairly long bitterness. You know, this a fairly long residual bitterness on the palate that keeps it from being really 100% clean finish for me. It's refreshing enough, and there's no off tastes to it. Sweet bready malts in the middle. But at the same time, if this is truly to be classified as a German Pilsner, I expect a lot more dryness. You know, there seems to be quite a bit of sugars in there that are perceived on the palate. And in order to kind of create a perception of dryness, they amped up the hopping. Which is really interesting. You see, now water is basically the hardest part of me to go and like this is the hardest for me to go and really discern how hard the water is in a beer. It's really quite tricky. Um, this seems like it would have been closer to like a Czech style pilsner with the softness. Well, not really with the softness, but with the sweetness. And I'm kind of wondering if the water is so hard that they have to go and really classify it as a German style. You know, but it's really not to style. That said, it's not a bad beer, but I mean, if they just called it like special lager, um, or just a general pilsner, you know, but when you call it something like a German pilsner or a Czech pilsner, it definitely evokes a very specific taste profile in my mind that is somewhat narrow, but still has room for expression within that narrowness. There's just too much sweetness on one end, too malty on one end, and it's almost like they just amped up a whole bunch of hops that show up in the mids there and into the finish to kind of create the illusion of that sort of perfect balance in between malts and hopping that a pilsner is kind of supposed to typify. More towards the dry side, obviously. But it just seems like they try to cover up the sweetness with more hops. Now, I'm being somewhat critical, but honestly, you know, I care about style guidelines quite a bit. I would rather a beer just kind of be nebulous rather than defined in its style. I mean, if you just called this a lager, you know, Orion 75 lager, I would have been, wow, this is a amazing lager. It's obviously all malt. It's obviously got a lot of great hopping to it. You know, go out and check this right away. But to call it a Pilsner, and as most places on the internet have classified it, a German Pilsner, I think is questionable. That said, it's a great beer. If you want something, I guess it's very reminiscent of a lot of Euro lagers, Euro pale lagers. I mean, yeah, definitely go and try it if that's up your alley. That said, you're only going to get some aspects of a Pilsner experience there, particularly in the nosing. So, yeah, this was on sale at Tamura's. So, it was originally $12 for a six pack. They had marked it down to about $9.50. That's why I got it. And that's also why you don't see me reviewing too many Japanese beers here. As an import price, they're pretty expensive import price wise, except of course for some of the Asahi and Kirin entries. And yeah, come on, back here, back here. Yeah, I mean, if you have easy access to it, I think it's worth a try. If you're like me and you kind of get hung up on styles, yeah, it's not a it's evocative of a pilsner, but it definitely does not fall into a pilsner category for me of either style. So, Orion 75 pilsner. Yeah, that's your beer review for tonight, folks. Cheers.